A shortage of vaccine supplies as well as safety concerns are among key drivers in scientists exploring vaccine mixing.
That's right. Experts that the Straits Times spoke to said that while mixing COVID-19 vaccines is possible and could even be beneficial at inciting a more robust immune response, they warn that more studies are needed to ascertain efficacy and safety.
Some countries are considering a mixed vaccine regimen. Last December, BBC reported that scientists in Britain and Russia were teaming up to trial a combination of the AstraZeneca and Sputnik vaccines to see if protection could be improved.
And earlier this week, German authorities agreed that those below 60 years old who have been given a first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine will receive a different jab for their second dose.
Let's get an expert's opinion on vaccine mixing from Professor Wee Eng Yong. Now, he's from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Program at Duke NUS Medical School. Welcome, Professor. Professor, before we get into the discussion, can we first clarify something with you? When researchers talk about vaccine mixing, what do they mean? Is it mixing different vaccines in the same dose or administering different vaccine types in separate sittings?
Well, thanks for having me again. The mixing that they're talking about is because of shortage of vaccine. And so for many vaccines that are currently used for COVID-19 now, it's to be given over 2 doses, right? So like Pfizer, 3 weeks apart between first and second dose, Moderna, 4 weeks apart between the first and second dose. And so what they're proposing is the first dose is, say, Pfizer's and the second dose is, say, AstraZeneca's, or vice versa. So it's not to be given at the same time.
Right. Well, thanks for the clarification, Prof. So you told our colleague Audrey Tan that more studies need to be done on vaccine mixing, but you also said that in theory, mixing can take advantage of the strengths of the different forms of vaccines. Can you elaborate on the benefits?
Certainly. So, the simplest form to think about is there are 2 major arms of the immune response, right? One makes antibody, the other one makes the killer T cells. And so, for instance, if you could use a vaccine that gives a very good antibody response, but not so good in the form of a killer T cell response, and then in the second dose you give another vaccine that gives a better killer T cell response. In that way, then by combining the 2 different vaccines, and you get a more holistic immune response against SARS-CoV-2.
Right. So on the flip side, Professor, what are the main concerns when it comes to vaccine mixing? Safety and efficacy, of course, but what are scientists looking out for specifically?
I think the safety is probably okay. I mean, these vaccines would have undergone sufficient clinical trials to know that they are going to be safe. Now, of course, they have never been tested in terms of the combination, but in the past, that's never been a problem. The bigger unknown is actually the efficacy. We don't know what the efficacy would be when you mix and match the vaccine. So, for instance, if the first dose is, say, the Pfizer's vaccine, and we know that if you give the second dose as, say, the same Pfizer's vaccine, then your efficacy is going to be in the region of about 95%. But if the second dose is AstraZeneca's adenovirus vaccine or J&J's, or and some places exploring Sputnik, then we don't know what that efficacy would be. And that's the drawback of mixing and matching without clinical trials. So it'll be great to have those trials being conducted at the same time.
Right, for sure. So, Professor, you mentioned earlier that I guess the exploration of vaccine mixing stems from a shortage of supplies in some countries. Does Singapore have a reason to look into vaccine mixing, even if we are not facing a shortage in supplies?
No. Short answer is no. I don't think this is beneficial for Singapore. 2 reasons. One is obviously we have a decent supply of vaccines and it's going well. The second reason is that we don't have a lot of cases here. So there's no need to go and mix and match the vaccine, especially when we don't know, we can't contribute new data to whether that that kind of mixing and matching would give rise to the same efficacy. So in Singapore's context, unless there's suddenly a big outbreak, which is looking very unlikely, that we should just continue with the kind of vaccination program that is currently in place.
Right. Now, Prof, just to round up our discussion for today, there's just something else that we just want to talk about. Now, we've also been covering the link between certain COVID-19 vaccines and the risk of blood clotting. Now, these incidents, of course, they primarily involve AstraZeneca's and Johnson & Johnson's vaccines, which are not offered in Singapore. In fact, these two vaccines don't even use the same mRNA technology as the jabs from Pfizer and Moderna. So that said, Prof, what's your advice for those here still worried about vaccination, even after reading these news reports?
Right. So I'll say a couple of things. One is that these are very rare events. I think the estimate now is looking like 1 in 6 million would get this blood clots. Contrast that with, say, for instance, getting SARS coronavirus 2 infection, where the risk of blood clots actually is much higher. So again, like we've said previously, right, that the decision to vaccinate and all that is really dependent on this risk-benefit analysis. And although there is this very small risk of getting blood clots with the, as you pointed out, the J&J's and AstraZeneca's vaccine, the risk is actually very small compared to not vaccinating and getting COVID-19. So that's one. I think the second point that I think needs to be emphasized is that this very rare event has not been seen with the RNA vaccine. So neither Pfizer's nor Moderna's have reported such events. And bear in mind that the RNA vaccines have actually been given to probably well over 500 million people, and we still haven't seen this rare side effect. So I think the vaccine is currently in use in Singapore, i.e. the two RNA vaccines are actually very safe. So I would encourage people to go forward and get vaccinated.
Professor, thank you very much for coming on the show. We always appreciate your insights. We've been speaking to Professor Wee Eng Yong from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Program at Duke NUS Medical School. Now, if you still have questions on the side effects of taking the COVID-19 vaccine, look out for our latest Ask ST segment on straitstimes.com.